Hey, I'm glad you're here. In our last episode that we recorded together, Jai and I talked about race. And so in today's episode, we talk about how that felt for us afterwards and some of the thoughts we had regarding that. And I wanted to invite you, if you're listening to this and you have a comment or a question or something you would like to hear us discuss, you can reach out to me at my website, angelaabide.com, and I have a comment section there that you can use and send me your feedback. Well, I would love that. So I hope you enjoy this episode today, and thank you for being here. Hello, welcome to the Deepening place. Hello, Jai.
Hey Angela, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I feel rested. I had some beignets this morning, and so I feel pretty good.
So, still in New Orleans?
Yes, ma'am. Still down here, still with the family, still seeing people.
I lived in Baton Rouge for a while, and so New Orleans is kind of has this little sentimental spot because we would go there, and I can imagine myself sitting on the porch having those powdered sugar beignets and a cup of coffee. That sounds great.
It's been a good one, yep.
So, last episode, we talked about Ahmaud Arbery and race relations, and I think we even decided to take last week off. We didn't record the week in between. I just needed more time to think, and we talked about it, and I kind of got the feeling that you felt the same way too, but I'm not sure if you want to say how you felt.
After recording,
You know, after we recorded and then Monday it came out, and then the next weekend when we would normally record, we said, let's just take the week off. We still were kind of processing through that episode, I think.
I definitely was. It was more like taxing than our normal recordings or conversations, I think. That's what I was feeling, and I just needed time to explore that.
I think I kind of have worked it out for myself, and I don't know if you have. It's super complicated though. And I didn't know if we could just talk about that aspect of it, like what that meant during the recording, how it was different after, and then even this last week. It's been 2 weeks since we talked about it.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to talk about it. Do you want to start from your perspective?
Maybe. I think
Okay.
right before we started this call, well, we didn't talk about it in depth, but one thing that you said is that you, after listening back to it, you realized that you were maybe not, I don't even know how to say it. You were talking more for your group than as an individual, or maybe you were worried that your perspective as an individual wasn't consistent with the group. Does that kind of sum it up?
Yeah, the latter of what you said, that my perspective wouldn't be consistent with the group. For me, it's exactly what you just said. It's pretty layered and it's kind of complicated. Yeah, if it's cool, I'll go with kind of my reflection and what I think
Yeah.
impact. So for me, it was like speaking as a black man, which already has connotations of like in the public eye is kind of easy to be perceived as a member of that group, understandably so. But I'm very aware, like the catch 22. My experience is not everybody's experience, and no person, rarely is any person in a group is that one experience relative to the whole group. So I don't know. I got stuck in that with my own mind, kind of as like the person and me observing the observer sort of thing. Like, I don't know. Listening back to it, I was observing both myself, personally, and then just thinking like, if this was just another black person talking or another person speaking from their experience, how could it be different? Is that really everyone's experience? And it didn't really tear me up or bug me. I'm not at the point where I'm just, really understood why it triggered me in some sort of way.
Yeah.
Not fully, not fully. I think maybe it came down to I'm a black man speaking from this experience, but I actually don't know Ahmaud Arbery or that area. I just know stuff that's similar. So I just got nervous. I think thinking that I'm talking from an experience that I really don't have a right to speak from. Kind of like I guess it's imposter syndrome, but it's the weirdest version of it because I'm not an imposter in my own story.
Yeah.
So it just took me some digging to get there. Yeah.
Yeah. I had something similar, but I feel like I have relationships and friendships with Black people, and I felt terrified that I had offended someone in some way. And on the other side of it, we talked about I have relatives in Georgia and people I know and love there, and speaking for them felt really weird. Or where we are the same here is that we got away from maybe just our perspective and we're thinking about the group. So after I sent the episode to several people that I know and love on both sides and asked for feedback, and that in itself was scary, and got some, but not a lot. Some people didn't even acknowledge that they got it. And I get that because people have sent me stuff that I just didn't have time to listen to and never responded. But I wanted really badly for somebody to say, okay, I'm going to be really honest with you here. I wanted somebody really badly, one of my Black friends, to come back to me and say, you did a great job. That was awesome. Or I get where you're coming from. Or,
Yep. Yeah.
and without that, it just feels like it's still open. Like it's a scary dark closet. I don't know if that was okay.
I can understand it to a certain level. You wanted some validation.
I just don't want to misspeak. I mean, I think it's important for me to come from a place of love, and I would not want to ruin any relationships because I'm telling my truth. And that is the heart of it, Jai. I believe that's the heart of the problem. I still care more about what people think than I care about the word becoming flesh. And I need to get to the point where I can tell my truth. That's what this brought up for me.
I would say that hits in on the head because, yeah, once you say that, it kind of like revealed it to me. I think for me, a part of it, not I think, for me, part of it was, especially when, the conversation around toxic masculinity comes up in that context, it's hard to talk about that within the Black community, how much of a problem that is. And I know we didn't use it in the Black community in the context in that last episode, but that's always been at the back of my mind when I was unpacking, and it's something I haven't spoken up about a lot for not maybe there's a fear or whatever, the reality of being ostracized because of that. And just to your point
Yeah,
about still not fully, speaking your voice or your truth for some of the same
yeah.
reasons, I definitely relate to that like 100%. And that comes up for me. That's yeah, it still comes up for me.
Do you want to dive into that? Does that feel like the right thing? Or,
I think it's relevant with the little Boosie video or comment that just came out. I think it's extremely relevant.
okay, well, why don't you tell that one? Tell that story because I haven't seen that. You told me a little bit about it, but I haven't.
It relates to the video you sent me on Instagram earlier of
Oh,
um
hold on. So this is Shaka Singor, that one?
yes.
Okay, he's a an activist for prison reform and cultural reform, and he had put out a video in response to the story you're going to tell, and I sent that to Jai to look at. So
Thank you.
that's the
Yes.
context there.
That is better
Okay.
context. So how do you say his name again?
Shaka Senghor. I think that's
Shaka
right.
Senghor. Okay.
Yeah.
So Shaka Senghor responded to Little Boosie. All right. Little Boosie, for those that don't know, is a rapper from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was convicted of murder so many years ago, did his time, he's released. He's a middle-aged man now. Lil Boosie has at least a son, and he sent out a message on social media last week that referred to him paying women or getting women to perform oral sex on his teenage boys or boy. I forget which one. And his message was that happened to him, and that's how he's passing on the tradition of a rite of passage for young men to be sexually involved almost as early as possible and as much as possible. Um,
So this was like their kind of initiation.
yes, for him, it's I think familial. I'm not sure if he does it, but I think it's
Yeah.
in his family. Yeah, and that has spurred a lot of conversation, at least in the aspects of the online Black community that I see. It's really centering around no one's using the word yet, or I haven't seen it too much, but toxic masculinity. The words are different, in different circles, but the words have generally been bad manhood or bad rites of passage, or there's a lot of different ways people have referred to it, but it is absolutely the same thing. A toxic masculine sort of trait that's been brought up, and and to my point, it's in the Black community. I can't speak for other communities, but I know it's very prevalent where I grew up. I know it's very, and Blue Boosie's right up the street from New Orleans. It's just very prevalent, and it's been relieving hearing more people say something about it. I've never identified with the hypersexuality of the culture. Never. I always thought it was weird and destructive, and it's not relieving that is out in the open. I think it's just more relieving that I feel like I have space now because there's people that want to have some dialogue about it, men and women, of different cultures. So it's been very relieving, and it is for me, it's very relevant.
Yeah, so it's almost like you're saying you, as kind of a sensitive spiritual person, saw that, wait, I don't think that's right. That might be more destructive to these younger boys. But because it was so culturally accepted, it was hard for you to find a place to say that.
That hits it on the head, like in the elementary school I went to, we had sixth grade girls that were pregnant, and in like fourth or fifth grade, you had kids sneaking off in the church pews to go do whatever to each other. I mean, this is from like a really young age. This was a private Catholic school, and so I've seen it since I was a kid, and it's for every other stuff, every other thing that got punished in school, that's something that never came up. Teachers never really talked about it. Girls were shamed once they were pregnant, but that's about it. So it's been prevalent in life since then.
Yeah. It's almost like I've been working a lot, just studying, meditating, contemplating this divine dance between the sacred feminine and the mature masculine, like the great mother and the great father. And I think we mentioned that in the last episode too, like the balance is off. And it's that what you're describing is in a perfect world, in a perfect balance, that flow, that dance is a continual giving and receiving between the great mother and the great father. And that's what intimacy is. And I've thought about this before. What is the perverted version of that? What is the opposite of that? And it's instead of giving and receiving, it's taking and using. And that's what I believe sexuality has become in so many places. It's a taking and it's a using instead of a giving and receiving. And I think when that trickles down, it's not sacred anymore. It's not a divine dance. It's a transaction. And it starts way too early.
I like that the notion of how did you say it? Taking and using.
Yeah. So, like,
Yeah,
on the masculine side, it's a giving. If you think about even our anatomy, it's a giving, like I'm offering. And the female, the divine, the sacred feminine is receiving. It's like, yes, that dance continues, and it's I mean, we're going very meta here,
Hmm.
but the man gives, the woman receives, the woman grows life within, the woman gives back to the man, gives this life that she's nurtured, and then he receives that life. It's a continual giving and receiving, and he nurtures that life and shows that life how to be in the world. And that's the mature masculinity, that generative. Let me show you the way. So it's this dance that goes on, and it's not specific to males and females. We have that both within us. We're responsible for both. Realizing that I have to get that balance right within my heart, that continual giving and receiving of nurture and care and structure and order. And then I can form healthy relationships with other people who have done that work. What we do instead is, men oftentimes in the toxic masculinity side of it, they look at every woman as for them, and I take what I want. Women kind of on the other side of it start to use sex or intimacy to get what they want. You lose that divine dance, so to speak.
I have a lot of friends that'll be bubbling listening to this conversation.
Bubbling like champagne, happy.
Nah, maybe boiling is the right word.
Okay, so
Maybe,
boiling, yeah,
yeah, maybe boiling. This is boiling. That's right, because this is a hot topic right now. You're hitting it
yeah,
on the head, and I think the most relevant way possible. That is definitely the vibe in so many relationships now, and maybe it has been for a long time. How marriage has just been, from my perspective, bastardized into just what you just said, a very transactional based relationship. It's a almost a quantifiable sort of thing, you know? But I say my friends will be boiling because some people don't want to hear that. I have several friends who've gotten, oh my goodness, I've been to three friends' weddings in the last 2 years that have all ended up in divorce within, the first few years of marriage. And so,
really.
yes, I have some that are successful as well, but it's definitely at like a 50%. I don't know.
I think that's one thing that came up for me with this episode, being so afraid of what everybody was going to think. I think you and I, or anyone who wants to make a difference in the world, has to learn to just say it. I think everybody just has to get to the point where they say, well, I mean, this is what I was made for. This is my word. It has to come out. I'm not really responsible for what happens to it after it comes out. But if I'm not faithful to that, I'm not doing what I was put on this earth to do. I think that's what it means to be true to yourself, to be true to your word. You have to tell the truth.
My brother is the biggest proponent of that I've met in my entire life. And he has recently committed to only, how did he say it? He says, I don't care if I come out sounding arrogant, but I just got to say what I got to say. Now, my brother, notoriously in my family, is not the opposite of me, but just about the opposite. If I'm quiet and sort of like more solemn, my man is loud, boisterous. He's ready to go. But to his point, I do take a positive thing away from that. Like, I think one of my brother's greatest gifts is that his name's Jaron, and it means to speak in Hebrew, and that's his
Are you
thing. He's
serious?
hmm Oh yes, he lives. Oh yes, indeed, he lives up to that name for sure. He's very outspoken. He's about to go to law school. He's leaving accounting. But you're the second person that I'm close to that has like shared that and talks about embodying that. And he's not. He doesn't discuss these things the same way you and I do. It just resonates. I'm just saying that it does resonate, and it's true. We've often talked about like why was Martin Luther King shot and dead? Why were these really prolific people that just come out and say like a hard hitting truth? Why is deaths so close to them always? And it's been a fear and point of contention is something that he and I have spoken about over the years for sure because we feel like I think that's what this conversation centered around. He and I have had so much to say about our experience. We've openly talked about the fear of like going out, sort of restarting the movement where Dr. King or whoever left off, and like the reality of those end in death. Like here, those doing that stuff again may end in death. But you bring up a very valid point. Like
Oh,
maybe where I kind of sit with it is where him and I kind of have an agreement. Like one of us may do it in this lifetime. We got to figure out who. If that's going to be the threat, then we got to figure out who's going to do it. That conversation just hits close to home.
Right before we got on this call, I was having a thought about that. I think if you die telling your truth, you're successful.
If you die telling the truth, you're successful.
Yeah. I'm going to tell the truth.
I've come to the same conclusion, which is a big meta spiritual moment, but
That's the power of we the people. That's what our founders meant. That's what Christ meant when he talked about the body of Christ. It's we the people that have all the power. The truth that I need to say about racism is that as long as we're divided, we don't have any power.
that is the truth of it. It's definitely the truth of it. There's a skit called Black Jeopardy. Are you familiar with it?
No.
So it's on SNL, and there's a black host, two black female participants, and then Tom Hanks playing a clear Trump supporter with a MAGA hat, and he's playing Black
Mm-hmm.
Jeopardy. And the episode is delightfully awesome because they're playing Black Jeopardy, and then the MAGA hat wearing guy like forms a relationship with all the black people playing, and vice versa. They had way more in common than they thought to believe. Now maybe that's not the point SNL was trying to make. Maybe that's how my eyes see things. I'm aware of that. To your point, there's people who want to get that message out there. I believe from many sides, myself included, and like even as I'm agreeing with you, some of that same stuff we started talking about comes up. Like, can I really say what I'm saying out loud? Of course I can say it. It's the truth. Racism is absolutely a tool used to divide people because race isn't even real in the first place. Culture is, place of origin is. We don't have different races. That is bizarrely inaccurate. So it is a dividing tool and or dividing tool, and I think that's more apparent now than ever. Like we even get into what Joe Biden said. I haven't even looked it up. I'm not. Did you hear what he said? Um,
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Did he say if you have trouble picking between me and Trump, you're not a real black person?
He said, if you're still having trouble figuring out who to vote for, you ain't black.
Um, Joe Biden said that out loud.
Joe Biden said that out loud.
So yeah, just to your point, race is being used to divide people. I don't know. That doesn't go well for Mr. Biden. Oh, I don't. What? Yeah, I'm not sure why someone makes a comment like that, but it does just support your point of or the message that you're sharing that racism is a divisive tool. And back to, I guess, close off our conversation somewhat, is like that's what's hard to say in the case of like Ahmaud Arbery. It's very hard to say that out loud, and I assume it's especially hard as a white person to say that this stuff is
To
just
say,
dividing us even further.
yeah, that one episode just opened up a huge can of worms. And even today, there are so many different directions we could go with it. We can't even figure out what to talk about.
Yeah,
We could have gone the toxic masculinity route, which we touched on. We could have gone tell the truth. We could have gone history, which we didn't even get into. But I wrote a lot of notes on the history of our country and, who formed the NAACP and the times when we've been most successful in this country overcoming racism is when Black and white people work together. We keep moving forward and going backward, almost like that's how it happens in a birth. The contraction
hmm.
happens and then the baby's pulled back in a little bit. And then it pushes out a little bit and it's pulled back in. And I feel like that's what we've been doing in our country. But I don't know why we keep going all the way back to slavery. When in the early 1900s, there was a lot of progress that had been made, a lot of really successful, highly educated, integrated people. And then some really awful laws and other things happened. Why don't we just go back to 1900? Or why can't we open our eyes and see that it has become socially unacceptable for people to behave in certain ways. We've made some progress. It doesn't mean we've arrived in the promised land. And you said that was kind of hard to admit.
That we haven't arrived in the promised land.
No, that we've made, some progress. It's not awful everywhere.
Oh yeah, yeah. Your question, you said, why do we keep going back to slavery? And that is where the institutionalized, really planned systemic racism comes in. From a lack of education about what the US was like for black people doing well in the 1900s, that is not widely advertised in any community or public school. That generation has mostly died off. The people that did have access to that is just completely silenced. I think of like Black History Month. It's just about the same handful of people that are shared year in year out, and they're not necessarily successful black people, they're successful activists. Black History Month
Right.
is focused on people who survived a struggle, not people who are thriving, which is that's all constructed. I could talk a lot about just the institutional racism. I think that is the scourge and plague of this country, the people that plan for this disruption amongst mankind, and that's why we keep going back to slavery, because there's not really a large foundation for what was positive after that.
So are you saying that it's necessary to go back there just to have context, just to make sure everybody's on the same page about what happened so that we can see clearly?
I think so. I think it's an important part of the origin story, but I also think what you're saying is also equally as important, that we need to get some of the middle point. Kind of like you asked me about my story, right? Vividly can tell you the beginning. I could kind of tell you where I'm at now, but you had to ask me to sort of dig a little bit deeper to get that middle layer and the middle piece.
Yeah.
Same thing for, I think, the story of the forced slave, of the African forced slave. I think we have to get that story. We know what happened when they landed here. We know we're at sort of in like the late 20th century. But we need all that in between, the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. What in the world was happening? What happened, all in between then to lots of different people. To your point, that part of the story is missing.
I can totally agree with you. And the way I said it, why do we keep going back to slavery, might sound insensitive. I guess what my point on that is, it diminishes the people in between that made so much progress and worked so hard and got us to where we actually are right now. And why don't we know the names of those heroes? Why, when someone is killed, we make sure every Black boy knows the name of that person? But do we know who Frederick Douglass is, or Langston Hughes, or W.E.B. Du Bois? Do we know all those people that fought in between? I mean, do we know that in 1919, a white guy named John Shillady showed up in Austin to visit the NAACP, which was the fastest growing one, and he got beat up really badly by the government officials here, and they sent him back on a train and told him not to come back. That's a white guy. The NAACP was founded by Black people and white people. Why don't we know that? From 1966 to 1975, the NAACP was led by a man named Kaplan. He was a Jewish white guy, a huge philanthropist and activist. They were fighting together. Why don't we know that?
Then maybe that's our calling a little bit then, Angela. If we're to talk about race, I think we just, I don't know. What do you think? Let's fill in the middle. Let's just get some real stories in here. Of some, like, the story I want to tell the most to people is Black Tulsa. It's a story of Black strength. It does end in like some horrific acts, but for me, I just want to hear some, like, I'm going to tell my kids more stories about Black people and just other people that prospered outside of the struggle that their community faced. Telling the story of the strugglers and how they survived, that's great, but there's got to be more to it. Just that those stories need to be told. However, we explore race, just telling some real strong stories. If we were to go down that avenue, I would love to tell just Yeah, just more stories. Kind of like you said about the NAACP just now. I had no idea that there was a white Jewish man in charge for so long, but I do know there's a much more storied history than it's told because I'm somewhat active with the Austin chapter. So I know bits and pieces here and there. And when I visit the Austin chapter, half the meeting attendees are white or Jewish or something, and the other
Hmm.
half are black. So yeah, I don't know. But I think stories, this void that we're recognizing is here. Other stories of truth that just need to be out there.
Well, look, here's a great story to end with, if you want to hear it. This lady named
Yes.
Mary Talbert in 1909 went to the Pan American Exposition, and she was a black lady in 1909. I don't know if she was an activist. She was just nothing limited her race or her gender, that type of person. So she went to the Pan American Exposition, which sounds a little bit like the World's Fair. I didn't really dig into that. There was an exhibit, and one was called Old Plantation, and one was called Darkest Africa. And I don't know if she had been to the Paris Exposition, but in Paris, they had done an exhibit on Black achievement. And when she saw this in America, she got really offended and upset about it. And so she started speaking out about it. Like, why are we pushing this forward? Why aren't we talking about Black people who've achieved and successful Black people? And that's what led to the Niagara Group. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And then the
Not familiar.
NAACP. Well, those were two different groups that eventually merged. And the reason it's called the Niagara, that's not the whole name, but there's the Niagara Conference or the Niagara Group. The reason that they are called that is because they had to meet in Canada because they couldn't get a hotel room for Black people. So they met right across the border. This group that was meeting to form an association to fight racism, ironically, couldn't even meet in the United States.
What a trip.
Yeah, but I
What
mean, I
a
think it's
trip.
interesting that the whole foundation of the NAACP was somebody being offended about telling these awful stories. Why aren't we celebrating the greatness? That's how it was formed. That was her idea. And then later, a white lady named Mary White Ovington, she was huge in NAACP. One of her things that she would do is she would go into these schools and tell Black children, hey, I want to tell you about how the NAACP is growing. I want you to know that all white people aren't the same. That was her big thing. She wrote a children's book. She wanted them to have hope.
Thank you for sharing that. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. You're so right. That advancement portion. I'm not going to say it's lost. I don't want to speak for NAACP. It could be brought to the forefront more with a story like you just shared. Yeah, Andrew, that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly the sort of story. Thank you. That is
But I
positive
mean,
energy.
it's like when you go tell kids that, the whole energy in their heart shifts. It feels
Yes.
full. It
Yes.
feels purposeful. When you only tell them about the Black people that are being gunned down in the street, they don't have any hope. It's not that it's not true, but there are other things that are true. There are medical doctors in most hospitals around the world that are Black, or at least in the South. Go to the hospital in the South. You're going to be treated by a Black doctor.
It is so true. It is so true.
So
Huh. Yeah.
we got a long way to go, but there's nothing I'd rather do, Joe.
Here, 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 here. Especially with this next election coming up, I am excited to see what the dialogue is going to be. I'm
Yeah.
genuinely excited to see what in the world's about to happen.
Yeah, it's another place we need to start telling the truth, you know? We need to see each other. We need to see each other and stop clinging to the extremes of our belief. We're killing us. We're killing we the people with our division.
Yeah, I think speaking from our own perspective is the other thing that can close off this conversation, or like what your perspective means. You know, you obviously have your own individual, but at times the perspective of your identity within a group, like for me, is either a man or a Black person. Like just what it means to have a conversation from your perspective, I would say is kind of the thing I'm noticing that's missing from across the board. How does one speak from your own perspective? You know, what does that mean? What does it look like? How do you receive someone else's perspective? I think that's kind of the underlying sickness in the human,
Hmm.
that needs to come up in these conversations as well.
Yeah, I like it. I think that's one thing I gathered from the last episode is that one of the reasons we're able to talk so openly and freely with each other is we trust each other. And, we can see beyond the Earthsuit and just see our essence. And that's where I feel like we can show people how to do that. And we are one. It doesn't matter what I look like on the outside. And we have to get beyond focusing on that so much and realize that we are one. It's that namaste. I honor the life in you.
I would really like to see you do something with the Beyond the Earth suit. That sounds like it's a great brand. I definitely get it. I think it really resonates. I'll laugh, but that is such an awesome way to put that. Beyond the Earth suit. We definitely do have that space. I can see you beyond your Earth suit for sure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
All right. Well, we crammed a lot in there and maybe a lot of trailheads to go for moving forward.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thanks, Chai.
Oh, you're welcome.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.